This is Perch. It's a nice, crisp winter day out for a little walk, and there's a stream going in the background that hopefully nobody is hearing in the background of this audio because that would be super annoying. But I find myself thinking about this topic a lot, and I don't think I describe it in the best way when I've tried to talk about it. And so I'll try again. But it's a frame of reference for me when I'm thinking about the comic industry, when I'm thinking about a lot of the fights that go on within the comic industry and it underscores the real problem. And I say this a lot. I think there are a lot of real problems in comics that we don't wind up talking about, and there could be a number of reasons for that. But the biggest problem, and I think the biggest reason why people don't talk about it, is that at the end of the day, comic books as a field, as a profession, as a thing that makes money, a thing that people read and enjoy, and it consumes a large part of their life, it's too small. It's abnormally too small. And I say abnormally because we have, if you think about brand recognition, if you think about millions or hundreds of millions, or in a case of some companies over time, billions of dollars that companies put in to try and get their brand recognized and out there and in the public consciousness, comic books largely do not have that problem. Characters like Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman and Spider-Man and Captain America and Wolverine and some of these others have the kind of brand recognition that companies like Apple or Google just throw hundreds of millions of dollars at maintaining. And the crazy thing about comics is, yes, there is marketing that gets done with these characters. There's licensing and other stuff that happens. But by and large, there's consumers, there's customers who are begging to have that Spider-Man t-shirt, that are paying good money to basically wear the brand around as an advertisement. That does not happen typically with Google. No one is clamoring to buy a Google T-shirt that they can wear around in public to profess their love of Google. Nobody does that. So in many cases, for companies like that, their problem is much tougher. In order to get that brand recognition out there, they have to pay for it. Comic books and comic characters have this amazing ability where there's just it's so much an embedded part of the public consciousness because superheroes are typically both easier to draw and more forgiving than other portraits. It means that anyone can come in with any style and draw a picture of Batman, and they're pushing that brand forward. And you do not have that, like, Keanu Reeves doesn't have legions of people drawing pictures of Keanu Reeves to try and get his brand out there. I mean, that doesn't even make sense, what I'm saying. But as we see in the industry, the comic book business has pretty low salaries, all things considered. There's a couple of people who are making out okay, and when I say low salaries, also keep in mind that if you're a comic creator and you're pulling in a steady 200,000 a year, which not many are, but a few, you're still at that level, at that importance to the industry. You're pulling in chump change comparing to what other executives or other people in other companies are pulling in for the same job. There's tech companies like Amazon that goes out and recruits people out of college, 4 years of a computer science degree, and they're coming in with a fully loaded package of anywhere from 220 to 260. And many people in comics are very, very lucky to ever get to that level. And if they are, these are people whose names are plastered all over books that are getting distributed everywhere. And people are quick to point out, oh yeah, but they're getting royalties. Yes, somewhat. But again, for such a huge, recognized brand, as many of these comic industries, companies, and characters are, it doesn't, the math still doesn't line up. Because in several cases, there's stories of Warner Media and Disney and others kind of cheating on royalties, or maybe cheating is too strong a word, but basically coming up with every reason why not to pay a royalty on something. The royalties themselves, while nice, are still nothing compared to a stock payout from many of these companies. And so there's not enough wealth being created inside these companies for the people who work within it to be creating some of the biggest brands in the world. And that includes crowdfunding. And there's people who have turned to crowdfunding and says, great, I'm making tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands in a couple cases. It's, after expenses, it's still, for this industry, for what it creates, for what it does, it's off. It's not right. And the industry also has this other aspect to it where there, because it is a closed knit community, because there is such fear of reprisals within this community, that anyone who questions what's going on as perhaps negative or that there's something wrong here is labeled a troublemaker, is ostracized in some cases, is pushed out of the paltry money that exists as it is. And so nothing really gets solved. It's a bunch of people who very jealously guard a very small pot of gold. And there's not enough people looking around going, wait a minute, um, Apple Apple spent more than $100 million promoting their brand last year. Now, Apple's a very well recognized, very well known brand, but turns out Batman is a pretty well known, well recognized character. And yet, we it's just backwards. It's just very, very, very backwards in terms of what the industry has and what it offers. And I think that becomes the core problem that all these other things center around. We talk about, oh, why is this comic being made? Why are these decisions being made? Well, clearly not for business reasons, but they should be. And here's the weird thing that's going to happen in comics, or may happen in comics. It hasn't happened yet, so there's quite a good possibility that I live my life and die long before anyone figures this out. Is if using an example of Apple or Google or Nike or some of these other brands, if somebody came along and did something to tarnish that brand, like, did you know that in many cases when there's a crime or there's something that's being displayed on TV where there's something bad has happened, that there are people within these large companies, and Nike has there's a lot of public stories about this where there's a traffic accident or there's a murder or something bad happens, and then there's the person's like wearing a Nike sweatshirt or Nike shoes, or God forbid, with some of the looting, it happens outside of a Nike store. There are people within the company who work hard to erase those images out of the news media. They work hard to get that brand unassociated with these horrible things that hurt the brand. They do not want to have the brand image attached to negative things. Meanwhile, over in comics, there is such a casual disregard for the brand that it's like, hey, let's take Batman, arguably the biggest, most recognizable character in comics. Let's take that brand, and let's go ahead and throw out a YA book where Batman is in a love triangle with the Joker and Catwoman. That is not that's brand destruction. Now, bear in mind, you may have liked that comic, you may have liked that graphic novel, you may like that idea. Maybe you write fan fiction with shipping Batman and the Joker. That's fine. That's up to you. And if it something is a book you like, that's still cool for you as a consumer, as a customer. I think this is where the arguments get all turned around. We have these fights down at the customer level about what should and shouldn't happen. And the reality is, if you got money and you want to pay that money for something, it's your business. And if you enjoy it or not enjoy it, good for you. There's having an argument about that is a gigantic waste of time. But for the company, for DC, it is not a waste of time. In fact, it's something that has to be considered. Do you want your brand attached to something that's going to confuse your brand? And I'm not taking even tarnish it. I'm not making any kind of judgment call on those kinds of books. But I am saying that when you've got a multi-billion-dollar brand, then it's things that confuse that brand, things that take away some of that power, are dangerous. They should be avoided. They have to be carefully managed and looked at. And the crazy part in all this is that not only do people not worry about that, they just casually kind of let whatever happens. It's often managed by people who are making, at the lower end of this industry. Now we're talking 5 figures, and they are making decisions for these brands without any real care about what happens in the future. Many of them are independent contractors. Several are just so lower paid with no stock and no long-term incentive. What do they care? If the brand implodes, doesn't really matter. And to hand that kind of power, to hand that part of your company off to people who really have no incentive to do anything with it is mind-blowing. It's to say it's a bad idea is too light. It's destruction on a level that makes absolutely no sense. And bear in mind, this rule does not see it doesn't matter about current styles or trends or what somebody wants to say, or whether you're trying to sell into this group or that group or whatever you're trying to do. If somebody came along, like let's say Rob Liefeld came along with his style and said, we're going to take Batman back to the 90s and we're going to draw him like I did when I was doing Youngblood, and that's what we're going to do, and I'm going to reimagine all this kind of stuff. Somebody should stop him and say, no, hang on, don't do that. Does this make sense for our brand? Is this going to be something that's going to have some longevity? Is this going to make our brand stronger or weaker? What does this do to this thing that has, number one brand recognition in the globe for comics? Whether it's a Rob Liefeld, and maybe you like Rob Liefeld's style, that's great, but is that a good idea? My point here is that it transcends whether you're into kind of a particular style or a particular anything, and says who's really making sure that the decisions that are getting made for this stuff are good decisions. Is anyone doing that? Or is it just kind of kicking the can down the road and just assuming that 10 years from now, this brand will still be around and people will still be interested in it and we can do whatever we want with it? That's not how brands work. And so the question I often have is, who in the big two, who in these offices are thinking about this, are thinking about, hey, we're creating a business, we're creating a platform that has to last decades and generations and pull off hundreds of millions of dollars for comics, sure, but also for licensing, for movies, for all these things. And we cannot afford to screw around with that. We can't afford to casually just let people randomly dip in and out and make whatever they want. Again, if you're listening to this and you're a customer, then you should cry out for whatever it is you want. You're the customer. If you want a robot version of Batman, a lizard version of Batman, the LGBTQ version of Batman, whatever you want, that's fine. That's your business, and you're completely in your rights to ask for that. But the company should have good common sense to know what to deliver on and what not to deliver on, so they don't blow up the whole thing and then nobody gets anything. That's the part, and to me, that's the problem in comics, is it's just kind of silently floating down the river with nobody really paying attention to any of this stuff. They're just, that doesn't really matter. And I always go back to the problem is that there's no long-term incentive for these people to keep it going or go in a certain direction. And in many cases, the people in charge promoted their way into it. People say fail their way up. That's not quite right. It's not fail their way up. It's just, they stuck around the office long enough and they're like, hey, let's give this person a VP title. They don't make a lot of noise, and why not? And that's how they get their jobs that they probably shouldn't have. That's the thing that worries me about comics, is that who is shepherding the brand? Who is making sure that the best decisions are being made for the longevity of the characters themselves? And I realize that's not a creative comment. That's not nobody gets excited talking about brand longevity. I get it. But, it is an important piece of this entire picture. And if people don't worry about it, it's going to go away. Anyway, that's my thoughts. What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments below. Like, subscribe, click the bell for notifications. It's a nice, cool, crisp day out here. Hope you're having fun. Thanks for listening.